There is a quiet tragedy that happens in many relationships, not the loud fights, not betrayal, not even abandonment, but something far more subtle. It is when love fades, and the mind keeps insisting it is still there. We are remarkably skilled at convincing ourselves that we are loved, especially when the truth threatens our sense of safety, identity, and worth. The human psyche prefers familiar pain over unfamiliar truth. So we rationalize, we excuse, we hope. But love, real love, leaves patterns, and the absence of love does too. Tonight we are not here to accuse anyone, we are here to see clearly, because clarity is not cruelty. Clarity is compassion for yourself. Here are 5 profound signs your partner may not love you. Even if you deeply believe they do, they are there but not with you. Their body occupies the same room, the same couch, the same bed, yet something essential is missing. You can feel it in the air, like a quiet draft through a closed window. Words are exchanged, routines are maintained, responsibilities are shared, but the living current between 2 inner worlds has gone still. What remains is function without feeling, structure without soul. You begin to sense that you are no longer meeting another human being, only a role they continue to play. At first, it is subtle. Conversations narrow. What once flowed freely now feels constrained, practical, almost mechanical. You speak of schedules, money, tasks, and obligations. These things matter, of course, but they are not where intimacy lives. Intimacy lives in curiosity, in the desire to know the invisible landscape of another person, their doubts, their longings, their quiet fears, their evolving sense of self. When love is alive, there is a natural pull toward these inner territories. When that pull fades, interaction becomes transactional, as though 2 people are managing a shared project rather than sharing a life. The psyche notices this long before the mind names it. You may feel restless, vaguely sad, or strangely lonely even in their presence. You might try to dismiss it, telling yourself that this is what long relationships look like. That depth inevitably gives way to routine. But routine does not have to be empty. Habit does not require absence. Something else is happening here. Something quieter, more unsettling. The other no longer turns toward you inwardly. Their attention, once alive with interest, now skims the surface of things. A woman once said, "He never asks how I'm really doing anymore. Only whether dinner is ready." On the surface, this sounds like a complaint about manners or effort. But beneath it lies a deeper grief. To ask how someone is truly doing is to acknowledge their inner life. It is to recognize that they are not just a function, not just a provider of comfort or service, but a living, feeling being whose inner state matters. When that question disappears, it is not merely conversation that has been neglected. It is being itself. Human beings are shaped by being seen. From the earliest moments of life, our sense of self forms in response to another's attentive presence. When that presence withdraws, something in us contracts. We may continue to perform, to adapt, to give, but we no longer feel mirrored. Over time, this lack of emotional attunement creates a subtle erosion of connection. You start to feel less real in the relationship, as though parts of you exist unseen and therefore unlived. Psychological research repeatedly points to emotional attunement being understood, emotionally responded to, and valued as a central pillar of relational satisfaction. But this truth does not belong only to research, it is ancient, embedded in the human condition. To be loved is not simply to be kept company, it is to be recognized. When recognition fades, love begins to hollow out, even if the external structure remains intact. The most confusing part is that nothing overtly terrible may be happening. There may be no cruelty, no betrayal, no dramatic conflict. This absence is quiet. It hides behind politeness, routine, and shared history. That is why it is so easy to ignore, and so hard to name. You may find yourself working harder to bridge that gap, talking more, explaining yourself, offering more care, hoping that your effort will awaken something that has gone dormant. But love does not need to be coaxed into curiosity. When it is present, it moves naturally toward the other. Over time, you may notice that you are the one initiating depth, asking questions, reaching inward. The imbalance grows. One psyche is reaching, the other is retreating. This dynamic creates a peculiar kind of loneliness, one that exists in close proximity. You are not alone in space, but you are alone in meaning, and meaning is where bonds truly live. Absence of presence is not neutrality. It is communication. It says, without words, I'm no longer here with you in the way I once was. The danger lies in misinterpreting this silence as temporary distraction or fatigue, when in fact it may reflect a deeper withdrawal of emotional investment. The soul has stepped back, even if the body remains. This withdrawal often has less to do with you than with the other's inner life. When people lose contact with their own depths, they often lose the capacity to meet another's. They may be preoccupied with unexamined fears, unresolved conflicts, or a gradual numbing that comes from living too long without reflection. Instead of turning inward to confront these changes, they unconsciously turn away from intimacy itself. The partner becomes collateral damage in this inner avoidance, yet understanding this does not erase the pain. To live beside someone who no longer meets you inwardly is to experience a slow diminishment of shared reality. You begin to question yourself. Are you asking for too much? Are you imagining the distance? But the psyche does not invent absence, it perceives it. Love that is alive leans forward. It listens not only to words, but to tone, mood, and silence. It senses shifts and seeks to understand them. When that leaning forward stops, when curiosity dies, something essential has changed. And that change deserves to be acknowledged, not explained away. Because to ignore the absence of presence is to slowly disappear within the relationship yourself. And the cost of that disappearance is far greater than the pain of seeing what is true. When you gather the courage to speak about your hurt, you are not asking for perfection. You are asking to be met, yet instead of being met, you are corrected. You are told that you are overreacting, that you are too sensitive, that what you feel is not serious enough to deserve attention. These words may sound casual, even reasonable, but they carry a quiet violence. They do not address your pain, they erase it. And over time, this erasure teaches you something dangerous, that your inner experience is unreliable, inconvenient, or wrong. Love does not argue with pain. Pain is not a debate to be won or lost. Pain is a signal rising from the deepest layers of the psyche, asking to be acknowledged. When love is present, it listens first. It does not rush to defend itself. It does not immediately explain, justify, or minimize. It leans in with curiosity, because curiosity is the natural posture of care. When curiosity disappears, dismissal takes its place, and something essential breaks in the bond between two people. Dismissal often disguises itself as honesty. The other may claim they are simply being rational, objective, or realistic. But what is truly happening is deflection. To acknowledge your pain would require them to confront their own impact, their own limitations, perhaps even their own guilt. And so, instead of turning inward, they turn the focus outward toward your reaction. The problem is no longer what hurt you, but the fact that you were hurt at all. This maneuver protects their ego, but it slowly fractures your sense of emotional safety. At first, you may try harder to explain yourself. You search for better words, calmer tones, clearer examples. You believe that if you can just make them understand, the distance will close. But understanding cannot be forced where there is no willingness to feel. Eventually, a subtle shift occurs inside you. You begin to speak less. You edit your emotions before they leave your mouth. You tell yourself it is easier not to bring things up. What you call peace is often self-silencing. This is how the inner split begins. On the outside, the relationship continues. On the inside, you start to doubt your own perceptions. You ask yourself whether you really are too sensitive, whether your needs are excessive, whether your feelings are a burden. Over time, this doubt becomes internalized, and the voice that once dismissed you from the outside takes up residence within. You learn to invalidate yourself before anyone else can. Human beings are shaped by emotional response. From childhood onward, our sense of reality is strengthened when our feelings are mirrored, and weakened when they are denied. When a partner consistently minimizes your emotions, it does more than create conflict. It destabilizes your inner compass. You lose trust in your own emotional signals, even though those signals exist to protect and guide you. This is why dismissal feels so disorienting. It does not merely hurt on grounds. Many people remain in such relationships because there is no obvious cruelty. There may be affection, shared history, moments of warmth. Yet beneath these moments lies a pattern. When it truly matters, when vulnerability is required, you are alone. The other may be present in body but absent in emotional responsibility. They hear your words but not the meaning behind them. And meaning is where connection lives. Psychological research consistently shows that emotional attunement, being seen, understood, and responded to, is one of the strongest predictors of relationship satisfaction and emotional health. But long before this was measured, it was lived. Every culture, every myth, every enduring story of love points to the same truth. To love someone is to take their or world seriously. When that seriousness disappears, the relationship becomes structurally intact but spiritually empty. You may notice that after being dismissed repeatedly, a quiet resentment forms, not because you want to be right, but because you want to be real. You want to feel that your inner life matters to the person closest to you. When that need goes unmet, the psyche does not forget. It stores the pain in subtle ways: fatigue, numbness, irritability, a sense of emotional distance that grows harder to bridge. Often, the one who dismisses emotions is disconnected from their own. Unable to tolerate vulnerability within themselves, they cannot tolerate it in another. Your feelings become a mirror they do not wish to look into. Instead of seeing you, they turn away, leaving you to carry not only your pain, but the weight of their avoidance as well. Absence of emotional validation is not neutral. It is a message. It says your inner experience is not welcome here, and when that message is repeated often enough, something in you begins to withdraw in self-protection. You may stay, you may function, you may even smile, but a deeper part of you goes quiet. Yet your emotions do not disappear simply because they are dismissed. They wait. They surface in other ways, asking again and again to be recognized. Because at the deepest level, to be loved is not to be agreed with, fixed, or corrected. It is to be understood. And when understanding is consistently withheld, soul feels it long before the mind finds the words to explain why. There is a pattern the psyche recognizes long before the mind dares to name it. It appears not in moments of calm, but in moments of distance. When you pull back, when your energy withdraws, when you grow quiet or begin to imagine life without them, something in the other suddenly stirs. Words of care emerge. Promises are made. Affection returns with an intensity that feels almost convincing. For a moment you think, there it is. This is what I've been waiting for. Yet beneath this surge lies a troubling truth. The effort did not arise from love freely given, but from fear suddenly awakened. When stability returns, when the danger seems to pass, the effort fades again, the warmth cools, the attention drifts. You are left holding the familiar emptiness, wondering what you did wrong this time. Over and over, the relationship moves between neglect and intensity, absence and urgency. This cycle is exhausting because it asks you to live in constant tension, as though connection must always be earned through the threat of loss. This is not love rooted in devotion. It is attachment rooted in comfort. The other does not awaken because they desire to nourish the bond, but because they fear the disruption of their familiar world. You are not being chosen, you are being preserved. There is a profound difference between the two. To be chosen is to be valued for who you are. To be preserved is to be kept because you're absent. NCE would create discomfort, instability, or inconvenience. Love is consistent. It does not require alarms to function. It does not wait until the house is burning to remember that it matters. Love invests quietly, steadily in small daily acts that do not announce themselves. Fear, on the other hand, is reactive. It is loud, dramatic, and short-lived. It appears in moments of crisis and disappears once control is restored. A man once said, "She only becomes affectionate when I'm halfway out the door." His words carry confusion but also clarity. He was not starved of affection, entirely only of affection freely given. What returned to him in moments of leaving was not connection, but panic. Panic can mimic love for a while. It can say the right things, touch in the right ways, and awaken hope. But it cannot sustain intimacy, because its motive is not union, but survival. The psyche is deeply sensitive to motive. Even when the conscious mind wants to believe, something inside you remains unsettled. You feel temporarily relieved, but not truly nourished. The affection feels conditional, tied to your willingness to stay rather than to their desire to care. This creates an unspoken contract. Your loyalty is exchanged for moments of attention, and contracts of fear eventually corrode the soul over time. You may notice yourself becoming smaller, quieter, more careful. You hesitate to express dissatisfaction, knowing that it might trigger either conflict or another dramatic cycle of threatened departure and temporary change. You learn, unconsciously, that stability comes at the price of silence. This is how fear-based attachment trains you to abandon your own needs in order to keep the peace. Real love does not need the possibility of loss to remember its value. It remembers every day. It shows up not only when you are leaving, but when you are staying. It invests not to prevent abandonment, but to deepen connection. It is present in ordinary moments, listening without urgency, caring without being asked, choosing the relationship even when nothing dramatic is at stake. When effort appears only during crisis, the relationship is not being nourished. It is being managed. Crisis becomes the only language through which change is possible. And so, without realizing it, you may find yourself creating distance just to feel closeness again. You pull away, not because you want to leave, but because leaving seems to be the only thing that wakes the other up. This is a painful strategy, one that slowly entangles love with anxiety. Fear-driven effort is also unstable because it is fueled by external threat rather than internal commitment. Once the threat subsides, there is no inner force sustaining the change. Promises made in panic dissolve in comfort. Apologies fade into habit. And each cycle leaves behind a residue of disappointment that accumulates quietly inside you. Often, the one who reacts only to loss has never learned to value connection in its living form. They respond to absence more readily than to presence. They are stirred by crisis because crisis forces awareness. But awareness born of fear rarely matures into care. It remains dependent on external pressure to exist at all. To notice this pattern is not an act of judgment, it is an act of consciousness. It allows you to see what truly fuels the relationship. Is it devotion, or is it avoidance of loss? Is effort a daily expression of care, or a temporary response to threat? These questions matter because they determine not just how the relationship feels now, but how it will shape you over time. Because a bond sustained by fear teaches the psyche to confuse anxiety with love. And love in its truest form does not keep you guessing whether you matter. It shows you consistently, quietly, without waiting for the moment you are almost gone. There comes a moment in every life when something inside begins to shift. You grow more confident, more aware, more whole. You speak with greater clarity. You carry yourself differently. Old fears loosen their grip, and new possibilities begin to feel real. Growth does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes quietly, as a subtle realignment of the inner world. And yet, the people closest to us often feel it before we say a word. The question is not whether they notice your growth, but how they respond to it. At first, you may expect celebration. After all, love delights in expansion. Love recognizes growth as life asserting itself. But instead of joy, you encounter something else: distance, irritation, sarcasm, or an unspoken tension. Compliments are replaced with jokes that diminish. Support becomes conditional. Encouragement fades into silence. You may sense an invisible resistance, as though your becoming is somehow disruptive to the balance you once shared. Love expands when the other grows. Insecurity contracts. This contraction does not always announce itself openly. It can hide behind concern, advice, or subtle control. They may question your choices more than before, suggest you are changing too much, or remind you of who you used to be. On the surface, these reactions can appear caring. Beneath them, however, lies the fear that your growth will alter the relationship in ways they cannot manage. If your success, healing, confidence, or independence makes them uncomfortable, it reveals something crucial. They were attached not to your becoming, but to your earlier form. They loved the version of you that fit neatly into their expectation, their needs, their sense of stability. The more whole you become, the less manageable you are. And for someone whose sense of safety depends on your smallness, your growth feels like a threat. This dynamic often has little to do with you personally. It arises from an inner conflict within the other. When one partner grows, it confronts the other with their own stagnation, unresolved fears, or unexamined life. Rather than turning inward to face these tensions, they may turn outward, attempting to slow or contain your evolution. Your progress becomes a mirror they would rather avoid. Psychologically, this reflects a fear of individuation, the process by which a person becomes more fully themselves. Individuation requires courage. It demands responsibility for one's own inner life. When one partner begins this journey, the other may feel left behind. Not because love has diminished, but because dependency has been exposed. Dependency often masquerades as closeness, but it relies on imbalance to survive. Growth threatens that imbalance. You may notice yourself shrinking to restore harmony. You downplay achievements. You soften your confidence. You delay dreams. You tell yourself that love requires compromise, that relationships demand sacrifice. While compromise is part of intimacy, self-erasure is not. Each time you make yourself smaller to soothe another's insecurity, a quiet resentment takes root. The psyche does not forget what it has denied. Over time, this creates a painful inner conflict. One part of you longs to keep growing to honor the life stirring within. Another part fears the cost: distance, conflict, or abandonment. You stand at a crossroads between authenticity and attachment. This tension can feel unbearable because both needs are real, yet only one leads to wholeness. Love does not ask you to stop becoming. Love adapts, learns, and grows alongside you. It says, become more, and let us discover, oh, we are now. Fear, on the other hand, clings to what was. It says, stay small so I feel safe. Remain familiar so I do not have to change. When fear dominates, the relationship becomes a container that limits life rather than support it. Sometimes the resistance is subtle enough that you question your own perception. You wonder if you are imagining the tension, if you are being selfish for wanting more. But the body often knows the truth before the mind accepts it. You may feel heavier after interactions, less energized, more doubtful of yourself. Growth should bring vitality, not guilt. When your expansion consistently leads to emotional withdrawal or punishment, something essential is misaligned. Often, the one who resists your growth is not consciously malicious. They may genuinely fear losing you. But fear of loss rooted in dependency is not the same as love rooted in respect. Respect honors the other as a separate, evolving being. Dependency seeks to preserve the familiar at any cost. To grow in the presence of resistance is one of the most difficult tasks of the psyche. It requires trusting that your becoming is not a betrayal, but a necessity. Life moves toward wholeness whether we allow it or not. When a relationship cannot accommodate that movement, it reveals its limits. Your growth is not the problem. It is the signal. It shows you where love is expansive and where it is constricted, where connection is rooted in freedom and where it is rooted in fear. In listening to that signal, you begin to understand a deeper truth. Love that is real does not fear your becoming. It recognizes it as the most honest expression of who you are. There is a particular kind of loneliness that has no name in ordinary language because it seems to contradict itself. You are not alone. Someone is there beside you, close enough to touch, close enough to hear you breathe, and yet inside, you feel isolated, unseen, quietly abandoned. This is the most painful form of loneliness because it denies what your eyes can see while confirming what your inner world already knows. Long before the mind accepts it, intuition has begun to whisper the truth. You lie beside them at night, sharing the same physical space, yet you feel as though a wall exists between your inner worlds. Words may be exchanged, routines observed, responsibilities fulfilled, but something essential is missing. You speak about your day, and they nod, perhaps even respond, but the sense of being truly heard never arrives. It is as though your words fall into an empty room. The echo you expect, understanding, curiosity, resonance never returns. This kind of loneliness is deeply confusing. Human beings are wired to associate closeness with safety and connection. When closeness exists without connection, the psyche struggles to make sense of the contradiction. You begin to doubt your own experience. You tell yourself that maybe this is normal, that long relationships naturally become quiet, or that passion fades and is replaced by companionship. But companionship without emotional presence is not companionship at all. It is coexistence. You may find yourself missing the version of them who once looked at you with genuine interest, who asked questions not out of habit but out of desire to know you. You remember moments when being together felt alive, when conversation flowed effortlessly and silence felt warm rather than empty. The contrast between then and now deepens the ache. What was once nourishing has become draining, not because something dramatic happened, but because something essential quietly left. Loneliness inside a relationship cuts deeper than loneliness alone because it confuses the heart. When you are alone, the pain has a clear source. When you are lonely with someone, the source is obscured. You are deprived not only of connection, but of clarity. You may ask yourself whether you are asking for too much, whether your expectations are unrealistic, whether the problem lies within you. This self-questioning becomes another layer of isolation. Many people say, but they're still here. They point to physical presence as proof of love, as though the body alone could carry the weight of connection. Yet love is not measured by proximity. Two people can share a home, a bed, even a life, and remain emotionally distant. Connection is not about being near. It is about being met. It is about the feeling that your inner life matters to the one who stands as closest to you. When love fades, the body often stays, but the bond dissolves. This dissolution is subtle. It does not announce itself with finality. Instead, it reveals itself through small moments of absence, a lack of interest, a missed opportunity to connect, a silence that feels heavy rather than peaceful. Over time, these moments accumulate, creating a pervasive sense of emotional exile. Your intuition senses this long before your conscious mind is willing to accept it. Intuition speaks through feeling, through discomfort, through a quiet sadness that has no obvious explanation. The mind resists because acceptance threatens the stability of the life you have built. To acknowledge emotional loneliness is to confront the possibility that the relationship no longer offers what the soul requires. That realization can feel terrifying, and so many people adapt. They lower their expectations. They stop sharing the deeper parts of themselves. They turn to distractions, work, or fantasy to fill the emptiness. On the surface, life continues. On the inside, something vital withers. The cost of this adaptation is the slow loss of authenticity. You remain, but not fully. You are present, but not alive in the way you once were. Often, the other person is not consciously rejecting you. They may be lost in their own inner world, disconnected from their own emotions, unaware of the distance they have created. Emotional absence is often inherited, learned long before the relationship began. But understanding the origin of the absence does not remove its impact. You still feel alone. You still long to be seen. This loneliness becomes especially painful because it touches a fundamental human need. To be known, to be understood, to be emotionally held. These are not luxuries. They are necessities. When they are unmet in the place where you expect them most, the psyche suffers. You may feel inexplicably tired, irritable, or numb. These are not personal failures. They are signals. The tragedy of emotional loneliness is that it often goes unnamed. Without language, it becomes harder to address. Yet the biting heart continues to speak, reminding you through discomfort that something essential is missing. The longing you feel is not unreasonable. It is the longing for connection, for resonance, for the simple yet profound experience of being met where you are. And though the mind may hesitate, the intuition persists. It knows that love is not simply about staying. It is about sharing an inner world. When that sharing disappears, what remains is not love as the soul understands it, but a shadow of it. To feel lonely while together is not a failure of gratitude or commitment. It is a call to awareness, a quiet, but persistent reminder that presence without connection leaves the heart profoundly alone. Here is the truth most people avoid. Love is not proven by words, history, or hope. Love is proven by presence, care, effort, and emotional safety. If you must constantly justify their behavior, if you are always waiting for the version of them that rarely appears, if loving them requires betraying yourself, then the relationship is teaching you something vital. Sometimes the lesson is not how to love another, but how to finally love yourself enough to stop settling for shadows. And remember this. Being alone is not the greatest fear. Being unseen is. Choose truth, choose clarity, choose yourself. Because real love does not require you to disappear to survive it.